Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. I do appreciate you being with me. Hope you are safe. Hope that everything is going okay for you as you are in quarantine and as the coronavirus continues to play itself out. Listen, I want to thank you so very, very much for the response to my April special. Then comes the end, which we are currently looking at in today's video and in this little series on Matthew 24:32. 70 weeks are determined for the resurrection, the land promises of Israel. Now, if you purchase these separately, this would cost you $70 plus, okay? Actually, a bit more than that. But for the month of April 2020, U.S. orders only, all right, when you order these, the April special, and again, U.S. orders only, I will include absolutely free of charge Israel 1948 Countdown to Nowhere. Now, again, if you purchase these separately, independently, if you purchased all four, it would put the price up, $80. But for U.S. orders only, April 2020, total delivered price. Remember, you get this free. Total delivered price, $55. And again, thank you so much to those of you who have taken advantage of this very special offer. This is fantastic. This is saving you a lot of money. All right. Remember that Jesus was asked by his apostles in response to his prediction of the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. The disciples asked him, "Tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" And Jesus then began to describe the generic times. I shared with you a little bit yesterday about what happened in that very first century. There were wars and rumors of wars. There was famines. There were earthquakes. There were just all sorts of horrific events taking place in the first century. It's easily chronicled from history. But then, of course, he told them that there were going to be false prophets. He told them there was going to be the apostasy. Now, there's a great question. In fact, my friend Gerald Davis has suggested to me that the great apostasy was really a reference to the apostasy in Judaism. And that's distinctly possible. The more I look at that, the more I sort of kind of, lean that way, but I'm not yet 100% convinced. But whichever it was, we know that there was an apostasy within Christianity. All you have to do is read Paul's letters to know that. But also, there obviously was a widespread apostasy within Judaism. There were horrific things going on within Judaism. But we are focused for the moment at the fact that Jesus said, "This gospel of the kingdom must be preached into all of the world as a witness to the nations." Then comes the end. The end is totelos. The end. By the way, that's covered extensively in this book, Into All the World. Then comes the end in the April special. So while I could spend a tremendous amount of time demonstrating, number one, the fulfillment of the preaching of the gospel into all of the world, and followed by declarations of the nearness of the end, I'm only going to focus on about three passages. I'm going to share with you 1 Peter, James, and Revelation. Not all of it today, obviously. Now, in 1 Peter, Peter was writing his epistle to the pilgrims of the dispersion, the diaspora in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. They're spread throughout the Roman Empire. They've heard the gospel. Now remember that 1 Peter is written in the general vicinity, time-wise, as Colossians and Ephesians and Romans, all in just about the same period of time. The time period in which Paul in Romans 16, 25 and 26, said the gospel had been made known to all the nations, fulfilling Jesus' prediction that the gospel would be preached into all of the world as a witness to the nations. Into all the world, to all the nations, Matthew 28, 18 through 20 as well. Go therefore and into all nations and preach the gospel. So here we are dealing with the time period in which Paul said the gospel had been preached into all the nations. Peter is writing to the diaspora in the nations, among the nations, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12 and 13. They've heard the gospel. Oh, and by the way, the Gentiles are glorifying God because of it. And Peter says, remember now, into all the world, then comes the end. Peter writes in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 5 that Christ was, quote, ready, from the Greek word hetoimos. Now, hetoimos carries with it two ideas. Number one, morally prepared. If someone is ready to take on a job, then he's qualified for that job. Hetoimos. But there's also the temporal element of it. A bride adorned who is prepared for her groom. Well, let me tell you, you know if a bride is all dressed up and ready, if she got on the wedding garments, she's ready for the wedding. She doesn't expect to wait for 2,000 years. Hetoimos, Alfred's Greek Testament, says, would be understood by the first century Greek readers as the imminent judge. And so Peter says that Christ was ready to judge the living and the dead. Then in verse 7, and you got to catch the power of this now, Peter said, the end, totelos, the exact same term used by Jesus in Matthew 24:14, the end of all things has drawn near. You know, it's absolutely stunning to me that Sam Frost, who wrote his book, Why I Left Full Preterism, and in his book, the Parousia of the Son of Man, he said the end in Matthew 24:14, that's the end of this age. That's the end of this age. That's the end of the Christian age. Well, sorry, Christian age has no end, but. So he says, totelos in Matthew 24:14 is the end of the current age, but he comes to 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 7 says, oh, the term totelos there, that's something totally different. It's not the same thing. He didn't offer any proof of it. He just claimed it. Well, I'm sorry, just simply claiming something doesn't prove anything. I could claim I'm a millionaire. That sure wouldn't prove it. And then he says, Peter does, 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 17, the appointed time. It's not simply the time. It is literally the divinely appointed time has come for the judgment. He uses the definite article, the to krino. Now listen to me. The judgment there in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 17 is the judgment of verse 5. Well, what is the judgment of verse 5? It's the judgment of the living and the dead. It's the resurrection. The point being that Jesus said this gospel will be preached into all of the world, then comes the end. Peter, writing later in that same identical generation, after the gospel, or after Paul had declared, after he declared the gospel had been preached into all the world. Oh, real quick digression. It's really fascinating to me how some former preterists, they lean so heavily on the patristic writers. Oh, we got to pay attention to the patristic writers. They're great. There's a consensus in them. We can't ignore that. Well, guess what, folks? The patristic writers with very, very few exceptions, are agreed the gospel was preached into all the world in fulfillment of Matthew chapter 24 and verse 14, and it was fulfilled in the first century. But what do those former preterists say? Oh, well, no, we don't have to pay attention to that. So on the one hand, we have to listen to the patristics. On the other hand, we don't. That's their position. We don't have to pay attention to it when it refutes and confounds their doctrine. Okay, enough of that. Point being, what did Jesus say? This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to the nations. Then comes the end. By the way, what end had the apostles asked about? The end of the age. And here's Peter in 1 Peter, written at the time in which it was declared the gospel had been preached to all the nations, into all of the earth, to every creature, into all of the cosmos, into all of the oikumene. And Peter said, the end of all things has drawn near. Folks, I'm sorry. This is irrefutable. Tomorrow, we'll look at James's declaration concerning the end as it relates to Matthew chapter 24 and verse 32. You don't want to miss it. I'll see you on the flip side.